All right. Hi, everybody. So it is Saturday, February 20th when I'm making this video. To contextualize that, I've read and given feedback on the drafts of all of your research proposals. This week, we will start meeting one-on-one for conferences, and you'll also get the prompt for draft one of your research paper. So that means we are kind of really embarking on the research process at this point. You have a source evaluation under your belt. You're fine-tuning your research proposal, and you're going to be starting to write the paper any day now. So I haven't posted a video in a couple weeks, and I thought it was important that we kind of touch base at this important turn in the semester. So we really are at the point where everything we do from here on out is going to be devoted to your research paper, this research project, which is ultimately the bulk of the work and the bulk of your grade in this class. In a regular face-to-face semester or in a synchronous semester when we were meeting as a whole group, usually we would have talked about the paper quite a bit at this point and gotten a lot of questions answered and things like that. Because this is asynchronous and I haven't been seeing all of you guys at the same time, we haven't really had a chance to go over it as a whole group. So I wanted to make this to kind of set the stage, give you a direction to go in so you're not kind of going at this blindly at this early stage. So I took some notes to kind of organize my thoughts. I'm probably going to wind up trailing off anyway. So as always, if there is something that I mentioned during this that you want me to go into a little bit more, or you want me to just otherwise clarify, please reach out, ask me about it. I can either address it with you one-on-one, or if there are kind of common questions across the board, I can make more materials for the whole class. So the things I want to go over is one, just kind of like what's the goal of this paper? How should you approach it? What should you see as the purpose of this work? Two, kind of the role of frames and cases and how you're going to use those to narrow your project. Three, the role of originality in this paper and the expectations when it comes to originality. And then finally, just some like formatting submission stuff that I'll kind of go over quickly at the end. Okay, so to start, what's the goal of this paper? This is probably the most important thing to cover at this early stage. It is one of the most common questions and areas with misconceptions that students have when they take this course. So the goal of this paper is to investigate some questions, something truly puzzling, complicated, intriguing, complex, right? It's kind of corny, but I always tell students it's called research for a reason. You want this to be a search process, a discovery process, which means you don't really want to have a grasp on exactly what this project is going to be just yet. You want to have a general interest. You want to find those complicated questions, those open questions in the scholarly conversation, but you might not know your specific research question just yet, and you certainly shouldn't know your answer to that question just yet. So you really shouldn't know your thesis. You really shouldn't know kind of the form that this eventual paper is going to take. A common misconception that I see is students approach this paper as like, here's the point I want to prove. Here's my idea, here's my argument, and I'm going to spend these 10 pages proving that point. I always tell students that's not academic research, that's activism, right? You kind of have the answer prescribed, you feel strongly about it, you're not open to changing your mind, and you just want to kind of use the paper to hammer that point home. There is a place and time in the world for activism, but it's not the focus of this style of writing or the goal of this class or this paper. So if you are like really attached to some argument and you know you are not open to changing your mind or discovering other possibilities, now would be the time to pivot, right? You might do some kind of like issue adjacent to that, or you might scrap it and do something else altogether. So I would say kind of be mindful of that now. You want there to be a genuine pursuit of something. You want there to be a discovery process. A lot of students are kind of nervous about that, and I get that. I kind of have some control freak tendencies myself. Maybe you want to kind of have a whole understanding of how the paper is going to unfold and what it's going to look like. But the more stubbornly you hold on to that now, the more damage control we're going to have to do down the road. So again, I know it's hard for those control freaks out there. I feel you. I am one of you. But I am going to ask that you trust me at these early stages. The point now is to learn more about some topic, some issue, to start gathering good sources, and to look for those open questions, to look for the things that are complicated, the things where you can step in and learn something and kind of walk your reader through that learning process so maybe they learn something as well, right? So the purpose here is not to prove a point. The purpose here is to better understand something complicated, right? Kind of related to that, the goal of the project and kind of addressing some misconceptions. We'll get into this more when I get to that third point about originality. Another misconception I see in research papers is students conceive of it as like an encyclopedia article. Like, I'm going to teach you everything about X, about this one issue. And they'll find good sources and they'll cite them and they'll summarize them, kind of explain what they're about. But there won't really be any indication of where the student's voice came in or what the student is adding to the conversation. I would say most of the analytic essays were kind of at that stage, right? Where you guys understood the theories, you understood the sources, you were spitting them back and kind of combining them in ways that made sense. But there was no clear sense that we were learning anything beyond those theories, right? So in addition to pursuing a question, you also want to make sure you are contributing something to the conversation. So you're not just compiling and summarizing other people's information. There should actually be some new information that you're bringing to the table by the time we get to the end of the paper. That might seem like a tall order, but we have the next few months to work on this. There is lots of feedback built into the process. There is conferencing. There are a lot of developmental activities to get you there. Okay, so again, it's early. Trust me. Try to get on board with this process, and we will have plenty of time to make it work. Okay. Second point I wanted to address, the role of frames and cases in this project, especially when it comes to narrowing down this project. So again, you guys used frames and cases in the analytic essay. Most of you did demonstrate a grasp of that approach, right? Frame and case is really the kind of the structure of how I'm asking you to synthesize your sources. So the frames, for a quick review, are your theories, and your cases are the concrete examples, right? And the goal of the paper is, how do we use these theories to better understand these examples, right? On the feedback for the research proposals, one of the most common comments that I made was to say, be open to narrowing these questions as you begin to nail down your frames and cases. Acknowledge that these questions are going to narrow as you nail down those frames and cases. The reason for that is different theories and different examples are going to allow you to ask different kinds of questions and draw different kinds of conclusions, right? So if you say my paper is using psychoanalysis as its frame, right? Then what you're going to be looking at in those examples is the stuff that psychoanalysts care about. Early childhood experiences, how they might manifest in these unconscious ways in the adult, sexual repression, right? Like the things that psychoanalysts care about. Similarly, if you're drawing on behaviorism, right, you're going to be looking at how different behaviors are rewarded or punished in these examples and how that has produced subsequent behaviors. If you are drawing on existentialism, that's going to give you certain things to look at. Attachment theory, certain things to look at. So be strategic when choosing your theories, your frameworks, because they are really going to kind of define the structure of your paper. Until you nail down that framework, especially, you don't really have a good sense of what kinds of questions you're going to be asking. Because again, the questions, the approach, the observations, the conclusions are going to be based on what scholars using that framework are talking about. Similar comment for the cases. So this especially came up with students that were kind of drawing on some fictional and some nonfiction cases. You can pull your examples from either fiction or nonfiction, but again, they allow you to conclude different kinds of things. So if you're analyzing a movie, right, like a fictional movie, then what you're going to be talking about is how do we represent this thing in the media, and how do those representations go on to affect us? You wouldn't use the movie to say, like, how do people actually act in real life, because the movie is not really good evidence for that, right? They're made up. People have written these characters. You can't point to that and say this is how people actually function in the world. Again, so think about where your examples are coming from, and do those examples allow you to ask the questions you're interested in asking and draw the conclusions that you're interested in drawing. So again, be strategic early on as you're gathering that stuff, and continue to adjust and narrow your questions accordingly, right? The most kind of straightforward way to think about your research question is, how do we use frame to help explain case, right? How do we use frame to help better understand case? So again, if you look at like the strong examples that I'm posting on Canvas from past semesters, you'll see that the strongest papers are really getting that specific. They are naming particular theories, particular scholarly approaches, and they are at the very least gesturing towards the kinds of cases, the kinds of examples that the paper is going to look at. One last note about frames and cases. So another common misconception I see early in the process is students will think that the only sources they can find are sources that are talking about the exact same thing that their project is talking about. So like if you want to look at, how would a psychoanalyst describe the effect of Disney movies? I don't know, that was a strange combination, but something like that. A student will be like, oh, I think I have to change my project because I can't find psychoanalysts talking about Disney movies. And to that I say, no, that is not a problem. That is actually a good thing, right? If you found all of these projects with psychoanalysts talking about Disney movies, then I would probably say, listen, people are already doing that work. How is this going to produce an original project? Whereas if you're finding work that's just about psychoanalysis and stuff that's just about Disney movies, then you can do the original work of combining those, of drawing those connections, of synthesizing those theories with those cases. So be open when you're pursuing your sources, when you are looking for sources. As long as some aspect of it will help inform your paper, it's fair game, use it. And to go further, you actually want the sources to be doing something different than what you're doing. Because again, if the sources are combining the same kinds of theory with the same kinds of examples, there's a bigger chance that your paper is going to wind up repeating, summarizing those same conclusions. So to kind of summarize what I just said, you want to find individual pieces that you can put together in original ways, okay? So find standalone theories, or find people using the theories to look at different kinds of cases, find standalone cases or cases being looked at through different theories, and then it's your job to draw these new links, okay? Really quick related to that, you might find a source that is, 20 pages long and only 5 pages are really relevant to your topic, to your question. That's totally fine. Cite the source, quote from those 5 pages, and call it a day. You don't have to draw from a source that is like perfectly relevant from start to finish. It's probably not going to be the case that all of your sources are completely relevant to what you're talking about. So you are in control. You're the writer, you're in control of the project. Use the parts that are useful to you, that are relevant to the discussions you're having. Last bit about originality, and I started touching on this in kind of that first bullet. There is a requirement and an expectation that you do more than summarize in this paper, right? And like I said, this was ideally the case in the analytic essay as well, but it wasn't my top concern. So if you fell into like the B range or lower, like if you didn't get an A or a B plus on that analytic essay, it probably means you didn't do much of anything original in your paper. So to kind of explain what we mean when we say originality, I'm not asking you to like reinvent the wheel and like say something that's never been said by anyone in mankind. What I'm asking you to do largely is to find some weakness in the current scholarly conversation. Find some weakness in the frame that you're using. Find some thing that other people aren't really figuring out about these cases, right? You want to be able to say something is missing from the current conversation so that you can argue that your paper is helping to address that thing that's missing, right? Often this comes in the form of like critiquing the frames. So this theory is able to explain all of these things about these cases, but it doesn't really explain why this other thing is happening, or it doesn't really explain why the people are reacting in this way, or it doesn't explain why the therapy is not working, or it doesn't explain why blah, 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 whatever it is. So don't just demonstrate that the theories perfectly work on every single case. Hopefully it will be the case that they work to some extent, but also look for places where they fall short. Look for places where they don't work so well, because that really is going to be the thing that justifies the importance of your paper, that justifies the need for your paper. It's also, by the way, the kind of the fun part where your voice gets to come in. Because like I said, the goal of this isn't like, here's what I want to say and I'm going to prove my point. And I think when I say that, sometimes students are like, oh man, that's what I wanted to do. So this original contribution element, this like identify a weakness, a gap, a limitation element, is really where you can kind of step up to the mic and, bring your voice to the table, justify what it is that you're contributing, why it's important, and how it pushes the conversation forward. Okay, so the only thing left now is to go over quickly some kind of structural, logistical elements of what these papers will look like. So they should be at least 10 pages long. That's double spaced. I'm going to primarily be talking about MLA format, but if you want to use APA or Chicago or another style, you're welcome to. Just make sure it's consistent, okay? So I think all of those write in double spaced. So at least 10 pages. It could go over within reason, so don't turn in a 20-page paper, but like 12 or 13 pages is still in the realm of a normal submission. You're using at least 10 sources, and at least 7 of those have to be scholarly. So we had that library quiz a couple weeks back. When we say scholarly sources, we're talking about peer-reviewed journal articles. So primarily you're finding these through the library's databases, which you can access with your Rutgers login. You can find scholarly sources, peer-reviewed journal articles through Google Scholar, but really I strongly suggest you use the databases. And my reason for saying that is your selection is going to be much, much, much greater. So Rutgers pays to subscribe to many, many, many databases, whereas on Google Scholar or Google regular, you're getting free sources, right? So sometimes a title comes up, but you don't actually have access to read it. 9 times out of 10, or even like 9.9 times out of 10, if you look for that same title through Rutgers databases, you will have access to that title. So it's kind of like if you find it on Google Scholar, it will also be in the databases, but the reverse is not true, right? You just have a way greater selection. It's a perk of the tuition you're paying, right? Your tuition goes towards accessing these resources. So take advantage of it while you can, okay? We have links to those library resources on our page. There are librarians that will answer your questions. I can answer some of them, but the librarians are way better at it. If there's a source you can't access, or you're kind of hitting walls with your search terms or whatever, like I said, I will help as much as I can, but the librarians are really experts at that stuff. So if you go to the library website, if you go to the link on our Canvas site, they have the librarian's contact information. You could send them messages, you could call, you could kind of live chat with them, and they can help answer a lot of your research questions. Okay, so 10 pages, 10 sources. Sometimes students kind of shudder when I say 10 pages. It can sound kind of long and overwhelming. I will say once we get the ball rolling, usually that attitude changes. The paper is going to be broken into sections. So at its basic level, it's going to have an introduction section and a conclusion section and then a body in the middle. Even the body itself is then further broken down into subsections. So if your paper is looking at like 3 different cases through one theoretical frame, already you can imagine like, okay, maybe a page of introduction, maybe a page where you introduce, here's what the framework is all about. And then you're like, let me use the frame to investigate this first case, to investigate this second case, to investigate this third case. Maybe you consider some counter arguments and opposing views in a page, and then a page conclusion. That's 10 pages, and each individual section was only 2 pages at most. So when I break it down like that, often students are like, oh, that's, I could write 2 pages with my eyes closed. You guys will be able to do it, and we will break it down into sections like that. So if you look at our syllabus and if you look at our weekly schedule, you can kind of see the drafting process we're going to go through. You can see the pacing of all of this. To kind of sum it up quickly for you, there's going to be 3 rough drafts. Each of them is going to have a particular prompt that tells you, okay, at this point, the draft should be this long. You should have this many sources. You should have these sections. And that will kind of like increase as we move through that drafting process. There will always be either written feedback from me, peer review, one-on-one video conferences, in addition to like any other pre-writing or like revision activities that I'm putting up on Canvas. So there is a lot of guidance. If you are, hitting a brick wall or you're having to adjust or whatever, you're just kind of like in the midst of it, you're not going to be going at it alone, right? You will have me with you, you will have your classmates, right? You will have like assignments built in that are there to help get you through it and help kind of solve these problems as you run into them. So I think that just about covers it. That goes through all the notes I had, though I'm sure there are lots of other questions and important issues I could address. So as I said, please, after you watch this, please reach out to me with whatever other questions you have or things you want me to go into a little bit further. And like I said, I'm happy to answer it with you one-on-one or to make materials for everybody. So I'm really excited. This is a super exciting time in the semester. It's a super exciting time in the process. So I hope you guys kind of make the best of it. You approach this with an open mind, and I hope you, use me as a resource throughout this process. Okay. Happy research, happy writing. I'll talk to you guys soon.